Welcome y'all to another brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning in to this podcast, I welcome you and I hope that today's episode is one that will have you coming back for more content. So before we get into the main event, just a reminder for folks who are on YouTube, please make sure you hit that red subscribe button so you can get future notifications on new episodes of the podcast. If you're listening from Apple Podcast or Spotify, please make sure you subscribe there as well. And also, Identity Talk is now part of the Patreon community. So for those who want to get more access to exclusive content and to learn more about the ins and outs and behind the scenes work that we do at Identity Talk, please become a patron today. And for anyone that wants to catch up on past episodes of the podcast, especially if you're someone who is new to the community, you can go to our main YouTube channel, which is under my name, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, or you can go to our main website at IDTALK4ED.com. Thank you for those who have been supporting from day one or whenever you join the journey. Now, second announcement, as many of you already know, I have a book that's going to be coming out in November called Learn to Relearn, and it's currently on pre-order at Amazon and also on the Rutledge website. You could also go to our main book website at learntorelearn.com. This project was so special. It was 3 years in the making. There are so many people who I have to thank for providing feedback, providing edits, call-ins, all kinds of support. This was a project that was able to come to existence because of community. It was built by community, and I can't wait to share it with the community when it finally comes out. But in the meantime, to learn more about it, you can go to our website at learntorelearn.com to learn more about the chapters, the overviews, and why this book was written in the first place. So hopefully you all visit that website to learn more. All right, y'all. So today's episode is one that I am thoroughly excited about because we have a giant in this education space who's going to be talking with us. She is someone who's done it as an author. She is someone who has been a leading voice when it comes to anti-racist literacy, and somebody who from afar I've admired for a long time, been following her work, and I'm just excited to finally have the opportunity to share space with her virtually and learn more about her life as an educator and beyond. So without further ado, I want to bring on Dr. Sonja Cherry Paul to the podcast to talk with us about her journey, but also she's got a new book that's out right now that we're going to dive into. So let me bring Dr. Sonja on and we can get started with this conversation. Hello.
Hey Kwame, how are you?
I can't complain. I'm doing a lot better now that you're on the screen. How you feeling?
I am feeling honored. Thank you for the invitation. I'm super excited to be here.
Yes, and this is something that I've been looking forward to for a long time. I'm glad that we're finally able to connect. We've had a chance to connect through DM, through email, so to be able to connect on a more deeper, intimate level, I'm excited for it. So yeah, let's go ahead and get right in because I have lots of questions and your time is very valuable. My first question for you is one that I ask everybody. Who or what inspired you to want to become an educator?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to tell you, that wasn't part of my consciousness, a young child, or even when I first went to college. But my grandfather always said that I was going to be a teacher. And my grandfather is someone who I admired throughout my life for so many different reasons. He didn't learn how to read, and yet he valued education so much that he built a house in Cuthbert, Georgia, right across the street from a school so that his 4 children would have no barriers to getting an education. So when I think about my journey to becoming a teacher, I can't help but think about him, who always said that this is what I would do. So he's a major influence. And I really started to study education after I became a parent. I had my daughter young and went back to school because I was at a crossroads in terms of my career, and thought about my grandfather and started to take education courses and fell in love with it. That's really, really what brought me to teaching.
And as I was doing my research on you, it came to a surprise for me that you had a prior life before becoming a teacher that involved music. So you had aspirations of getting into the music business and being an agent within that business. So I'm curious to know what drew you to music in general, and why the music business at that time.
Yeah, you did some really thorough research because not many people know that about me, but I started to play piano as a child. I think I was 8 or 9 years old, and continued to play all throughout the rest of elementary, middle school. I went to a specialized high school in the United States in New York City and continued to play there. And then I went to college, my undergraduate, college. I majored in music, and in my last year switched to music business. So I had aspirations of becoming a concert pianist. That's what I was trained to do. That's something that I love to do. And it wasn't until my junior year that I started to not love it as much and thought I would try out music business. And then graduated and started to work as a production assistant for an off-Broadway musical. And then I worked for a major music label. And yeah, so, that always seemed like it was going to be my path until my husband and I decided we were going to start this family, and I changed. As I think many women who have the opportunity to have a child, you start to see life very differently. You start to reconsider some things, and all of this was happening for me at the same time. Music has always been a part of me, and it still is. I try to bring it into the classroom as a classroom teacher. Yeah.
Do you still play the piano?
That is a good question. I really do not. And I think about it all the time. And I'm hoping to reconnect with the piano in the near future. But my childhood piano, I recently gave it away to an assisted living facility, to the memory ward, because I wasn't making good use of it. And, I feel like a piano deserves to be used. But I taught my daughter to play, and then she went on to take lessons and become even better than me. And then after she moved away for college and then moved out, was just kind of sitting there. But I will reconnect one day.
Of course, when the time is right. When the time is right.
Yeah.
So I want to go ahead and take us back to the beginning. So growing up in Brooklyn as a little girl and going through your K-12 schooling, we all went through, I'm sure, ups and downs during that journey. And this is identity talk, so we know we're going to dig into the identity piece here. So my question for you is, during that journey, what were some of the struggles that you encountered as far as embracing your identity and showing up as your full self during those K-12 years as a child?
Yeah. I often tell the story to educators who I work with, and we are, thinking about our identities and maybe writing racial autobiographies. I can remember being very young, like 4 or 5 years old, and starting to notice television commercials, particularly shampoo commercials. And the thing that was always the same about these different shampoo commercials was it was always white women shampooing their hair, and they all had long flowing hair, and very different from me and from my mom. And I remember turning to my mom as a young child and asking her, do we shampoo our hair? Even though we had this special routine of hair, doing in my household, particularly on Saturday night, getting ready for church on Sundays, it was a pretty big deal. But because my young self could notice in these commercials what the erasure that was happening toward anyone that looked like me or didn't look like the white women in these commercials, I somehow thought I was so very different. So very different that I was not worthy of seeing myself in media. I remember going to bed and praying that I would wake up white with long flowing hair as a young child. I remember that. And then I went to middle school, and the middle school principal was a Black woman, Dr. Boyce, and she greeted us every day, and she told us that we were beautiful, and she told us that we were brilliant. In the United States, we said the Pledge of Allegiance, but she also had us sing the Black national anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Every day, every day we sang that. And what I saw this woman doing was creating a culture where Blackness would be centered and affirmed. Everybody knew Lift Every Voice and Sing, even my white teachers. And we sang it every day. And if there was an assembly, we sang all of the verses of that. And I was filled with just this incredible sense of Black pride. I felt beautiful. I felt brilliant because she made us feel that way. And then I went to high school, and the invisibility starts to creep in again, where you don't read texts where you see Black people positioned in powerful ways. So I feel like my identity struggles as a young person ebbed and flowed. And one of the things I try to impress upon educators today is school can be this space where you feel invisible, where you are erased, unless you are the kind of educator that is intentionally working to disrupt the kinds of practices that have become traditional and commonplace.
Now, when you think about the work you're doing now in literacy, do you go back to the high school experience and say that was the genesis of me starting to analyze literature through the anti-racist lens?
Yeah, I can honestly say, Kwame, that experience for me didn't really happen until I went to college, right? Applying an anti-racist lens to books and to teaching didn't really happen until my first semester of college. I went to a small college, a state university in the United States. There were about 5,000 students. Only 100 of them were students of color. And we were all in the Black Student Union because we just knew we needed to be together. Yeah, I remember, I don't know who gave it to me, but somehow someone gave me a copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X, and my whole world opened up. I couldn't put it down. I was walking across campus and reading. I sat and read. I laid down and read. And I was forever changed by this. And I know it gave me tools to think about experiences that I'd had, experience that my parents had, that I'd never really thought about before. It helped me to think about Black people in the United States during the time of segregation. It helped me to think about Black people at that moment and the ways that racism and white supremacy shaped our experiences socially, politically, economically, legally. I also took a Black women writers course that first year, which was taught by a white woman, definitely problematic. That's another conversation. I think I may have blocked out any of the discussions that happened in the class, but what it did was it exposed me to Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and Zora Neale Hurston, stories from these writers. And that's how I really began to learn about anti-racism, to think about the fight for Black liberation and what it means to be committed to the wholeness and the survival of an entire people, right? And so today, when I think about applying an anti-racist lens, I can't help but believe that anything worth knowing in this world comes from the brilliance of Black women.
Very true. No one can dispute that. That's just indisputable, especially at this point. Now, looking at your teaching career, because before doing what you're doing now, you were in the classroom. You were teaching English at one point. So, thinking back to those years in the classroom, what were the biggest shifts that you were experiencing in your pedagogy and your overall perspectives as it pertains to literacy? You were starting to allude to it a little bit with the last response, but what were some of those shifts that you found yourself experiencing pedagogically?
Yeah. I think for so many of us who become teachers, not all of us, but for many of us, we start off doing many of the things that we do because it's how it was done for us as students. And we don't
Like,
often stop to ask ourselves, but why? Right?
mhm,
I know that
true.
I replicated things that I experienced as a student without questioning it. And I think that's one of the biggest shifts that I made as an educator, was to move away from that, from just doing things because it was the way it was done. So there were early years where reading instruction in my classroom primarily looked like students responding to comprehension questions, or students not having as much choice, teaching that didn't include students learning how to speak back to texts, right? Teaching that didn't include helping students develop critical literacy skills or racial literacy skills. I can just tell you that I'm grateful that I've taught long enough to have confronted and interrogated those approaches and to change. I'm grateful that I stayed in the classroom long enough to apply ideologies that I learned about and continue to study and earn degrees around, to teach from a culturally relevant and anti-racist stance.
And it takes me back to my own years in the classroom when there was actually a time where I almost was an English teacher. So this is probably after my second or third year of teaching, and I was looking for different jobs. And I can remember the principal saying, "Hey, you may be teaching literacy in this school, so be prepared for that." And at that time, the go-to folks that you would go to learn about literacy, whether it's reading, whether it's writing, all the components, it was anything that had Fontes Pinnell's name and anything that
Yep.
had Lucy Calkins' name. That's what people would
Yep.
tell you. Get whatever they put out there and you'll be fine. But I think now that we've evolved in our thinking, especially when it comes to anti-racist literacy, we're starting to see that there's some gaps or deficiencies in even what they're putting out there. But it's one of those situations where if it's a tradition, you stick with it, even if we know it's not in the best interest of children, because this is what it is. Just like a lot of things that are tied to white dominant culture, you just go ahead with it because that's just how we've always done things.
Yeah, I'm lucky, Kwame, that in the school that I taught in, there wasn't a literacy program that was brought in. So there are some
Mhm.
good things about that. And then there are some things that leaders need to be possibly on the lookout for. What it meant is that teachers had the freedom and the agency to really instruct in ways that address the needs of the specific learners before them. Whether or not every educator did that, that's the part where leaders need to come in and sort of really take a look at. But when I worked for the Teachers College Reading Writing Project, I walked in never having taught the units of study, didn't know anything about them. And I remember the first day that I got there, I said to Lucy and to others, "I think we've made a horrible mistake about me coming here, because I will never show up like this." And so I'm grateful that to have had that experience, I showed up as a fully formed person coming in with a culturally relevant anti-racist stance and belief in the work of equity, and seeing immediately that there would have to be tremendous changes to what was happening there in order for me to feel like this is what is going to benefit the children for whom the institution of education was never truly built for, right, in the United States. So to say there was tension right from the start is an understatement. Yeah. And there are beautiful colleagues who I've met who were doing the work of equity within some of that work to the best of their ability. But I do believe that you have to want, curriculum has to be designed from an anti-racist, culturally relevant stance from the start. It's not something that you can just sprinkle in afterwards. In my new book, I talk about anti-racist fairy dust. There's no magical dust we can just blow into the air that's going to magically transform classrooms and curriculum or society, right? Anti-racism is about work. It's ongoing work and commitment to create spaces that are identity inspiring, where students can show up fully as themselves and recognize the full humanity of other people. For any curriculum or teaching to be anti-racist, it must acknowledge the oppression, the marginalization, the erasure of Black and Brown and Indigenous peoples, past and present, and it must also love them. So if that's not there from the start, no amount of sprinkling is going to make it so.
And the more I think about it, the more I believe that in order to truly be an anti-racist literacy teacher, and that's not just for folks who are in the ELA realm, that's for anybody. I don't care if you're a math, you a science, you're a humanities teacher. I'm a firm believer that everybody's a literacy teacher.
Yep.
Everybody, because it's the connective tissue for all the subjects. We think about different interdisciplinary projects. Literacy is the thread that ties it all together. But I think in order for this to become a reality, you have to be a capacity builder for yourself. You have to do the research. We're at a point now where you can Google book audit forms if you're trying to audit different books in your library. That's something that is out there. There's talk about, okay, let's learn about different cultures. But in order to learn about different cultures, you have to put in the research, which goes beyond the scope of what you have to do as a teacher more times than not. So my question for you is, if you had to put a percentage on it, ballpark figure, what percentage of this work involves teachers going the extra mile to really learn about different cultures, whether we're talking about the different identity markers across the board? What would be your ballpark figure if you had to guess?
I mean, I'm going to say 100%. Right? I mean, Gloria Ladson Billings has, Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings has been telling us and telling us and telling us what we need to do to teach in ways that are culturally relevant, that this requires students to be fluent in more than just one culture. And in order for students to be fluent in more than just one culture, their teacher has to be fluent in more than just one culture. And often what happens is the culture that we all become fluent in is white culture, right? Everything is from a Eurocentric paradigm. And so it's 100% necessary for educators to be culturally relevant themselves in order to teach in ways that are culturally relevant.
Yeah, I agree. And with a lot of the novels or reading selections that we use with our elementary, middle, even high school students, you have to have that schema, that background knowledge in order for them to access the content, in order for them to have a better understanding of what's going on, in order for them to have a better understanding of the story. Yeah. So as a teacher, you have to do your homework in order to fill some of those gaps that children will come in with. Because if you're thinking about, let's say, historical fiction or even anything nonfiction, you have to learn the history of it.
Yes. Yeah.
And even though that might not be in your job description, yeah.
Right. And to recognize that what you think you might know about a group of people is probably incredibly problematic, especially if that learning is coming from what you have learned from media, right? If you don't know people and their communities, you don't have relationships with folks, then you have a very surface level understanding that could easily be limited to stereotypes about groups of people. And so really what educators have to do is not only think about the professional changes that they need to make, but the personal changes that they need to make in their lives, right? That personal and professional is critical. We cannot pretend to be the anti-racist teacher from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. and then walk away from that school and that community right back into our personal lives, where everybody around us is from the same racial and cultural background. We don't have relationships with people from a variety of genders, sexualities. We don't have relationships with people who have disabilities. When you start to look at your own world and audit your own world, who's in it and who's missing? And how does that influence what you think you've come to know? And therefore, how does that experience what you are, how you teach in the classroom? These are the kinds of things that I want educators to think deeply about. That doesn't mean that you're going to try to rush out and like befriend a Black person if you were a white teacher, right? Like, I'm going to find the first Black person and make them my friend, right? No, you have to build relationships with people, and you could start with your colleagues. Too often I'm in schools where there are teachers, and I experience this myself. Some of my white colleagues would just walk right past me in the hallway and not even say good morning, not really have a thought to like treat me as a full human being. And I don't believe that if you're treating your colleagues this way, that you are going into a classroom and treating your Black and brown children humanely. I don't believe it. So there's a lot of personal work and professional work that has to happen at the same time in order to be culturally relevant and anti-racist.
So this season, Identity Talk for Educators Live will be including ad spots for businesses, products, and events that are adding significant value to their communities. And here's the catch. You don't have to be an educator or an education-based business to be a part of this. We're looking for people who are just doing great work in the community, and we want to use our platform as a way to amplify their work. So if you are an entrepreneur or you know of an entrepreneur who is doing just that, bring them in our direction. Have them reach out to us. If they want to learn more about their ad spots and how they can get themselves promoted on this platform, they can contact myself, Kwame at identitytalkforeducators.com. I'll say it one more time. It is Kwame at identitytalkforeducators.com. Hope to hear from you, and let's keep on amplifying our work and building each other up. It almost feels like now we have to take an underground railroad approach to teaching the way that we're saying that we should be teaching literacy. When you think about the wave of book bans, you think about the anti-DI policies, this current climate that we find ourselves in as educators. There are teachers who want to do what we're describing right now, but there's an element of fear that we cannot deny. We actually had Dr. Shamari Reed a few weeks ago, and we were talking about this fear of doing the work because it's real.
It is real.
You make one wrong move. We've seen different school districts make examples of excellent teachers who are doing exactly what you're describing. But you know what? At least they walked out of there with their dignity and knowing that they did the right thing. So for those teachers who are watching us today, who are like, you know what, Doc, I'm with you. I want to do it. But, you know, I got to take care of my family. I got to make sure that my career is intact. What would you tell them?
Yeah. First, I would let them know that I admire teachers who are trying to do this work, who want to do this work, who believe that this is the work, and we need them. And I don't want educators to sacrifice their jobs, right? I'm very concerned about the field. I believe that we're losing a lot of amazing educators. Yeah. And so for those educators who in those particular circumstances, it's important for them to think about what's in their sphere of influence in the classroom that isn't going to cause them to lose their job. But then to also put the pressure on teacher unions to connect with organizations like United Against Banned Books, to connect with policymakers so that these oppressive policies and laws can be lifted. And so too often, some educators believe it's not their job to be quote unquote political. And I want educators to understand that everything we do is political, right? To teach about race and racism is political. To not teach about race and racism, that is political. right? So it's time for us to really think about the groups and organizations that we can be a part of, who can be pushing for change. How can we get the voices of community members who agree with the kind of teaching we've been talking about? Sometimes their voices can be softer and not as loud as we need them to be. So, how can we organize? How can we galvanize folks to speak up and to speak out at the board meetings, at the PTSA meetings, right? How can we get our union to really think about who they need to be in touch with and organizations they need to be in touch with to help us fight against this kind of oppressive approach to education. These are some of the things that educators can do, and to really connect with, like I said, organizations like United Against Banned Books, who offers a bunch of strategies and talking points and toolkits that can be helpful for them to use in their schools and with their colleagues.
Yes, and this is a perfect segue into your book. So you have a book that's out called Antiracist Reading Revolution. And all these things that we've been talking about very much align with what you are imploring educators to do in their classrooms as it pertains to literacy. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on the screens for folks who may not have seen this beautiful cover.
Thank
And I'll even zoom in a little bit so you can get a better look. But for those that haven't purchased a copy, this is what it looks like. I'll leave that up there for a little bit. But I'd love for you to just share what makes Anti-Racist Reading Revolution different from other books you've written in the past, because you've written quite a few books during your time. What makes
you.
this book different?
Yeah. So at my book launch last month, I shared with folks that I felt compelled to write this book. And there are lots of reasons why I felt compelled to write this book and to write this book. And I think you're right, this book is very different from other books that I've written. But starting in 2020, where we were in the midst of this health and racial pandemic and the insurrection at the United States Capitol, it just made it very clear to me that we all need to be aligned with dismantling systems and structures. And how do we do this in education? And so as I work with schools and educators around the United States, and I model what this could look like in reading instruction, so many educators would say to me, where can I get this book? Where can I get a book that does what you're doing when you're modeling this for us, or when you're coming into my classrooms to work with kids? And the reality was I couldn't think of a book that was really, really, really doing this. So for those reasons, I felt like I needed to sit down and develop this book to support educators, to be a partner to them as they are teaching from an anti-racist stance in a landscape right now that seems particularly focused on reading as solely the skills of phonics and decoding and fluency. It felt important to me to position anti-racism as a skill that students need to have, and to a skill that they need to practice. Because really what anti-racist educators understand is that the skills of reading need to come together to support comprehension. As we encourage kids to read and to, explore a variety of texts and topics, we also need to provide kids with tools to explore questions like who builds knowledge, what counts as knowledge, and why is knowledge constructed, and to challenge students to address those questions with anti-racist answers, ways that are to answer in ways that are inclusive and anti-racist. So I wrote Anti-Racist Revolution to hopefully clarify, what does it look like to be an anti-racist teacher? What are some specific characteristics of that? And what are some of the critical moves I can be making as an educator that helps students develop the skill of anti-racism as a reader, and to apply that in their lives?
And hopefully people do go ahead and buy the book, because there's a lot of phenomenal content in there that will be helpful for any teacher who is currently in the classroom or even not in the classroom. If you're a parent, you could benefit from this book as well. So let's not
Yeah,
get it twisted now. Like, anybody could
yeah.
benefit from this book. So please go get yourself a copy. I want to go
Teachers,
ahead.
oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say that
No, go ahead.
teachers,
Go ahead.
librarians, caregivers, could definitely benefit from reading this book. Yeah.
For sure. I want to go ahead and circle back to the beginning of our conversation.
Mhm.
So you mentioned that you decided to make the pivot from pursuing the music business to then becoming an educator because you had a child at the time. I want to talk about Imani for a second, if you don't mind. Let's talk about Imani for a second because I know how
Sure.
much she means to you,
Yeah.
and as a mother who does this work, this
Mm.
hard work in education, I know it had to have been a joy being able to have your own daughter as a co-writer for an essay. Like, you gotta talk to me about that, how that even came about, and what that experience was like, being able to collaborate with your daughter on cultivating voices of Black girls in white spaces and having her have a chance to unpack her own experience with that.
Yeah. So this is a collection edited by a mutual sister we have in common, Dr. Yolanda Seeley Ruiz, and also Dr. Autumn Griffin, right? And so when I was invited to contribute to this collection, I knew this would be an opportunity for me to ask Imani, my daughter, whether or not she would co-write an essay with me. And she thought it was a great idea. And it was an opportunity for us to discuss our experiences for her schooling and me working in the same predominantly white, affluent, suburban school district in New York. And the process it was revelatory, it was painful, right? As we, talked about experiences that we both remembered and some that I didn't know, right? And it gave us
Mm.
opportunities to heal some wounds. So we grounded our work in Bell Hooks's All About Love, as did each of the contributors to this collection. And anyone who knows Bell Hooks' work knows that she laid the groundwork for Black feminist theory
Yeah.
of love that centers care, supports nurturing, and acknowledges mind, body, and spirit. And essentially, we were responding to the question, what can Black girls' literacies teach us about dismantling racial injustice and constructing educational possibilities? So Imani and I had a series of Zoom calls where we could record our conversations, and we assumed as Bell Hooks calls, a mindful remembering stance to re-examine our experiences in this context, to expose our wounds, and to discuss what it means to love Black girls and to heal. So we thought about, what does love look like and where is it found for Black girls in predominantly white K-12 spaces? How do Black girls navigate these spaces in the absence of love? And we make some recommendations for educational approaches, some teaching methods, and insights around ways to restore love for Black girls in white educational spaces, and to authentically recognize and cultivate their voices. One of the many things that came out of our work was we talked a lot about phrases that have become hashtags, like Black girl magic and Black excellence. And we know that these phrases are used to make visible the achievements of Black girls, Black women, and Black people in general, right? Despite the obstacles that they faced. But we talked about some of the unintended consequences of those phrases, how they can contribute to internal pressures of Black girls to exceed, yeah, despite the interpersonal and systemic racism that they're navigating in and out of schools, inequities that they should never have to overcome in the first place. And while Black girl magic is a powerful counter narrative to combat the invisibility and anti-Blackness that Black girls can experience in schools, I think our essay emphasizes the importance of truly listening to Black girls and truly loving Black girls so that they can see themselves as worthy of love just as they are.
And I'm gonna hit you with this alliterative sentence. You'll appreciate this as an ELA teacher. It perpetuates the presence of perfectionism that permeates throughout our society. Let me go.
I'm so glad this is going to be on this podcast because then I can listen back
Off
and
the
write that
top,
down and quote you.
off the top.
Yes. Yes, yes. You know, Black girls, they are this expectation that they're supposed to just be resilient all the time, right? And yes, they are resilient and they do resist. But what can we learn about Black girls and their experiences that helps us remove some of these barriers, the lovelessness, the isolation, the invisibility and hyper visibility that puts them in jeopardy, right? How can we work in ways that moves Black girls closer to self-love, which Hook says cannot flourish in isolation? So yeah, these are some of the things we think about in our essay. We hope people will read it.
For sure. People need to read it. It sounds more like a therapy session than it did a writing project from how you
Yeah.
describe it.
It was. It
Yeah.
was. It was really, really, it was really something. There were tears, there was joy, right? And more than anything, we wanted to make sure that we were not perpetuating a victim narrative in any way about Imani's experiences or Black girls' experiences. She is in no way a victim. And it was important to just kind of reveal some of these experiences that and nuances around these experiences that folks may not always recognize.
But I think more importantly, to emphasize the resiliency that's required to navigate white spaces. I think that's more of the counter story that had to be emphasized, so
Yeah,
people can recognize that, hey, yes, there were trials and tribulations that we went through, but we were able to get through it and be persistent through it all.
that's right. Yeah.
So
Mm.
I actually have a couple more questions to wrap us up. You've done a lot of things. You might be arguably the hardest working educator out there. When I think about all the things that you're doing right now, like we got the Institute for Racial Equity and Literacy. We have Red Clay Educators. We have the Black History Institute. You got the Black Creator Series. I mean, I'm sure I'm missing some other stuff. You just be busy. So I gotta ask you, at this point in your life, do you feel at peace with who you are as a person? What are some things that you still are exploring about yourself or would like to explore more about yourself?
Mm. Oh, that's a really, really good question. Do I feel at peace with who I am? Well, I want to just say yes. And because I live in a society that is most critical and unloving toward Black women, I think that I will spend my entire life working to reject negative and harmful ideas about who I am and who I should be or aspire to be. I'd like to say that it is easy for me to simply, ignore those negative ideas and to not let it rattle my peace, but it isn't, at least for me. And I know that it isn't for a lot of young Black women. It's no easy feat trying to exist in a patriarchal, racist society when you have to navigate the systems that patriarchy, white supremacy, and racism have built. That being said, I definitely feel more authentically myself and at peace with myself every trip that I make around the sun. The thing that I'm most peaceful about is the knowledge that I've become my own institution. You've mentioned a bunch of different things that I do. I will work with institutions, particularly institutions that are white created and white dominated. I will work with them, but I will not be of them anymore. And in that way, I've created a sense of peace around and within myself. And so when I can exist unbothered within that piece that I've worked to create for myself, yeah, it's a really beautiful thing. And again, my relationships with Black women and women of color are particularly precious and critical to my positive sense of self and inner peace, because these are the folks who hold up a mirror and make it possible for me to see me fully. Things, I think you asked about things that I'm still exploring about myself. Sure. I think the study of ourselves, the getting to know ourselves is a lifelong journey, right? To think about the things that you've been stuck in and how to break free of them, whether they are relationships or ideas, right? I think that's the work, right? To get to that bell hooks level of freedom, right? I'm always going to be working towards that, Kwame.
For sure. And for what you just shared, it sounds like you answered the final question, which is the one that we ask everybody. How do you stay true to the teacher in you? I think you nailed it in that response, but I don't know if there was anything else you want to add on to that.
Yeah, no, again, I think it goes back to, Bell Hooks, who said education is the practice of freedom. So that is a guide for me. Again, thinking about my grandfather, who couldn't read, but knew that about the importance of education so much that he changed his life so that his children could have access. I think about him and I think about our ancestors before him. Yeah, these are the things that keep me true, that force me to really hold on to my integrity in an environment where, it could be so easy to let that slide. I see people letting their integrity slide all the time in order to get the next gig or get the next job or to be included in the next, whatever it is. And I hope that I can hold on to who I am, what I believe, and my integrity, and to keep that intact.
And then finally, to close us out, how can viewers and listeners follow you on social media? You could also share your website where they can see all of the work that you're doing currently.
Yeah. So on social media, you can find me if you just go to at Sonja Cherry Paul, just drop the hyphen. Just go to at Sonja Cherry Paul on X, on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Threads. And you can also go to my website, sonjacherrypaul.com, and you can find out more about me, also ways to connect with me on social media and beyond.
There it is, y'all. Sonja, thank you so much for coming on. And I don't know if you had a chance to listen to our Lens episode with me, where we actually had a whole Sonja Cherry Paul segment. But if clearly
Oh,
you haven't watched it, it's okay. I'll tell you what I said. I'll tell you what I said. I just wanted to thank you because, as you know, my journey to writing this new book, Learn to Relearn, was very nonlinear by nature. Having to go from one publisher to another. See, people don't know that it's going through many publishers, and at a time where I was making that transition from one publisher to the next, I'm not going to mention the publishers because it's not about that today. I reached out to you. You barely knew who I was. You gave me some words of wisdom. You said, listen, like, I'm with you. Whatever you need, I got you. And you've always kept your word when it comes to that. And that's why I thank you for just being there along the way and continuing to provide the support. I appreciate that because it was a very difficult time having to make that pivot unexpectedly. But it's worked out, though.
Yes. It has worked out. Your book is going to be in the world in November. We are all so excited. It is masterful and it is so needed. I thank you for all that you do on behalf of children and educators everywhere. I have to just shout out Arlene, my sister. Can't wait to catch up on this episode and to hear it. Thank you for reaching out to me, to including me on this incredible platform. It's been an honor to be here, and it's an honor to know you.
Thank you so much. And I hope that you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right, people. So, what an episode. But we're going to have to go right now because I got to take care of some things here in the household. But guess what, though? As I always tell people, I'm going to wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, y'all.